Welcome into Texans Today, everybody. I'm your host, Jeremy Chuggs, and coming up on today's program, a look at the top storylines around the team during Texans mandatory minicamp. We had, the practices before. We had the OTAs, the voluntary workouts, but now this is where everybody needs to come together. This is where everybody's going to be now that the team is kind of getting into their main off-season program. I'll let you know what went down today at Texans mandatory minicamp and the top storylines that come with it. But before we get going, there's been a lot of chatter, here on the channel included, around Stefon Diggs, around Danielle Hunter, two of the top, guys the Texans brought in this offseason. So that begs the question, I think both of them are going to turn out to be really good players for the Texans this year. But the Texans have had a lot of swings and misses on big name players. So let me know down in the comments section, a player that you thought was going to be really good with the Houston Texans and wasn't. I'm going to be the first to, put my hand up and say, hey, I thought Brock Osweiler was going to be a lot better than he was with the Houston Texans, and he ended up being a huge flop for the team. Let me know a name down in the comment section, a player that you thought that was going to be really good with the Texans and then wasn't. Let me know down below as we get into the top storylines around the Houston Texans. First up, the offensive line. Guys who weren't there during voluntary workouts are now there for mandatory in Tytus Howard and Laremy Tunsil. Here's a picture of Laremy Tunsil here on the practice field per Aaron Wilson. And, the big storyline is, are these guys going to be ready? What's the offensive line going to look like to protect C.J. Stroud this year? Because a big year two for C.J. Stroud has to start up front with the offensive line and the big boys protecting him. We remember the one thing that slowed him down last year was his injury sustained against the New York Jets, and that happened on a play where he got, hit by a defensive lineman because the protection really wasn't there for him up front. And we look at, the right tackle, Tytus Howard, because I believe Laremy Tunsil, he's kind of getting up there in age, but still, I think he'll be good to go week one and for training camp. Tytus Howard, though, on the other hand, I'm kind of going back and forth on whether or not I think he'll be ready to go week one. It was kind of the same song and dance last offseason for Howard, and I think the Texans might have rushed him back a little bit too soon, but we'll have to see. Right now, with everybody healthy, this is what I have the Texans offensive line depth chart looking like. Laremy Tunsil at left tackle, Kenyon Green at left guard, Juice Scruggs at center, Shaq Mason at right guard, and Tytus Howard at right tackle. But it makes me think, did the Texans draft Blake Fisher because maybe Tytus Howard won't be ready to start right away this year? This coming in from another Texans content creator, Cody Stutes. He said, Tytus Howard and Laremy Tunsil are in the return to play group and battling back and are on track for training camp and where the team will find out more about where they are. DeMeco Ryans noted the offseason surgeries for both. So both of these guys obviously dealing with offseason knee issues. Laremy Tunsil more of a scope, less invasive procedure than Tytus Howard. But we'll have to see if both these guys will be ready to go week one. I'm more confident in Laremy Tunsil. Keep an eye out, though, on Tytus Howard. Next up, the next storyline is, do the Texans trade a wide receiver? There's been a lot of buzz around the, NFL media circuits. Here at Chat Sports, I have guys from other team channels asking me, constantly, will the Texans trade this guy? Will the Texans trade this guy? There's three guys that are really on the chopping block when it comes to trades that I think that could be dealt by your Houston Texans. John Metchie III is one of the hottest names on the streets of, teams looking for wide receiver help. Could they possibly trade for him? Xavier Hutchinson, another guy that could end up being dealt. And then everybody's favorite, Robert Woods. But it really comes to the question of, how many wide receivers do the Texans keep on their 53-man roster? You have guys like John Metchie and Robert Woods who are fighting for spots. I think the top four are solidified for the Texans. Tank Dell, Nico Collins, Stefon Diggs, and Noah Brown. But 5 and 6, you traded for a guy like Ben Skoranek earlier this offseason. Then you have John Metchie, you have Xavier Hutchinson, you have Robert Woods. Who do the Texans keep, and how many of the wide receivers do they keep? That'll be a big storyline looking at this Texans team, looking at this Texans wide receiver group. But it begs the question, out of the three guys I mentioned before, Robert Woods, Xavier Hutchinson, John Metchie, who do you think the Texans end up trading out of those three guys? Let me know down below because there's different ways to look at each of these guys. Robert Woods, he's older. Obviously, the Texans, I think if you ask them, they would like to deal Robert Woods most out of these three guys. But in reality, the guy that I think most teams are looking at, the guy that most teams are willing to give up draft capital for, is John Metchie. Now, I don't know if the Texans are willing to move on from the second-year player out of Alabama, but Metchie is a very tantalizing name for a lot of teams out there. I can think of a couple off the top of my head. I know our Steelers host, Jack Sperry, was asking me about Metchie because they need some wide receiver help. But let me know down in the comment section who you think is the most likely to be traded out of these three guys. Next up, the Texans secondary. We'll look at the Texans secondary in their groups here in just a moment. But before I tell you about this Texans secondary, the cornerback room, got to show some love to our sponsor of today's program, and that is Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/CLNS and use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. The finals, they mean just a little bit more on Prize Picks, and so do star players. You get boosted payouts on select basketball stars that you won't find anywhere else here on Prize Picks. That's why they're the #1 daily fantasy sports app in America. Go check them out today. And if you want to check out my picks for the NBA Finals, here's my Game 1 picks for Celtics versus Mavs. Luka Doncic, more than 30.5 points. I mean, dude's been on a heater. It seems like he scores more than 30 points almost every single night. Give me the more on that. Daniel Gafford, more than 6 rebounds. He's been extremely active for this Mavs team. So I think giving him the more on the 6 rebounds, that could be a good move. And then we talked about the star boosted payouts. We have one right here with Kyrie Irving, more than 4.5 assists. I think that is very doable for Kyrie. You can use my picks. Hell, you can even fade my picks. Just do it over at Prize Picks. There's always something going on at Prize Picks, and there's always action on Prize Picks. And this is the perfect time to try out something new as basketball is winding down during the NBA Finals. Make sure also, if you're not into basketball, maybe you want to, check out some other avenues they have. Make sure to check out esports this month because for every Wednesday and Saturday in June, if your lineup doesn't win in esports, you'll get your entry fee back. Choose from Counter-Strike 2, Call of Duty, League of Legends, and more. You can check all these out on Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports made easy. Now, looking back at the Texans secondary, there's been one guy and one standout alone for this Texans secondary, and that has been one Derek Stingley. I mean, this dude has been absolutely lighting it up in OTAs and minicamp so far. I mean, he is by far the best player in the Texans secondary. And here's him stretching a little Sting and King action for you. Derek Stingley and then Desmond King as well. Both guys who I could see starting for this Texans team along with, maybe a mixture of Kamari Lassiter and Jeff Okudah on the outside. And I think really it's been a showing out party for Derek Stingley. He was injured his first season with the Texans. Last year finally came back and looked really good. So I think Stingley has shown a lot, and so has Texans rookie Kamari Lassiter. The second-round pick for the Houston Texans, as Aaron Wilson kind of noted on X earlier today. Some quick reactions today in coverage from rookie corner Kamari Lassiter, second-round draft pick. There was one play where he broke up a pass for Dalton Schultz that looked like he was in really good coverage. So it looked like the rookie's coming along very well, which is great news for this Texans defense, along with, their CB1, Derek Stingley Jr. I think he's really going to be the linchpin in this Texans secondary because we have a pretty good pass rush, which we'll get to in just a moment. But Derek Stingley Jr., I think, could legitimately be a top 3 corner in the NFL for years to come. We talk a lot about Sauce Gardner. The NFL media loves them some Sauce Gardner, but I think Stingley might show out this year and might be better than Sauce Gardner. I expect him to at least be a Pro Bowler if he's healthy. And ceiling, I think this is the year Stingley's an All-Pro. He's one of the top 2 corners in the National Football League. If you agree with me, drop those 24s down in the comment section if you think Stingley can be an All-Pro this season for the Houston Texans. I want to see the comment section littered with 24s because I'm telling you this. If you haven't bought stock in Derek Stingley yet, buy now because at the end of the season, it's going to be at an all-time high. Next up, I just mentioned it, the Texans pass rush. I mean, not really a lot of opportunities in OTAs and minicamps for this pass rush to show out, but hey, we at least got to see the unit together for the first time. Hunter and Will Anderson Jr., 55 and 51. I mean, a quarterback's worst nightmare right here is this Texans edge duo of Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson Jr. Will Anderson, by all accounts, looking fantastic this offseason. Everybody's saying that he looks like he's been in the gym. He looks like he's gotten a lot better throughout the offseason period. And we look at this Texans pass rush basically going into next season. This unit looks unstoppable. Danielle Hunter, 16.5 sacks last year. Denico Autry, 11.5 sacks. Will Anderson, 7 sacks. 35 sacks combined for this trio. The most sacks by any trio heading into the 2024 season from last year. This trio right here, this Texans pass rush is going to be very dangerous. And hell, you have Derek Stingley on the back end, but I think this pass rush, this Texans defensive line is going to, help this secondary really improve and make them look a lot better than they actually are. Because if you can get after the quarterback, if you can really mess up his timing, it's going to help all those guys in coverage, and especially, guys like Jeff Okudah, guys like Kamari Lassiter, maybe Jalen Petrie, Jimmy Ward on the back end. Those guys are going to be absolutely loving the pressure that this Texans front four can bring because that makes their life a ton easier on the back end. And the last storyline for Texans minicamp today, the Texans coaching staff. And looking at, it's really interesting to see Bobby Slowik in this Texans offense and kind of what they're looking at doing this year with the new additions of Joe Mixon, the new addition of Stephon Diggs. I saw a lot of clips today, 7-on-7, a lot of, on-air periods, but a lot of different motion being used. Saw a couple jet sweeps for Joe Mixon as well. Interested to see what Bobby Slowik brings out and what new formations, what, new plays he designs for the Texans this offseason. And going into year two, DeMeco Ryans has a lot to prove himself. A lot of people are saying, DeMeco Ryans, first-year head coach. They have a good one in Houston, but was it a fluke? Was it just, a lucky season for the Houston Texans and DeMeco Ryans? I think he has a lot to prove this year and kind of building off last year to say, hey, it wasn't a fluke. The Texans are the team to beat in the AFC South. That's all I have for you on today's show, folks. Thank you all for joining me on today's program. If you want to follow me on Twitter for more Texans news, rumors, I'm retweeting all these guys at Texans training camp or at Texans, what is it? Texans minicamp, not training camp, Texans minicamp, and also talking about the NFL, NBA, the latest around pop culture. Follow me on Twitter for all that jazz. And as always, make sure to subscribe for the channel for more Texans news and rumors content all year long. We're bringing you Texans content daily, the fastest growing Texans channel here on YouTube. So join us this year. Go to youtube.com/TexansTV or go down and hit the sub button.